And you know how I do not like spending money on depreciating assets.
Right, right. So there's a way around that, and leasing is the alternative.
Welcome to Women's Wealth Canada. I'm Glory Gray. There's been good news recently regarding women's wealth in Canada. A new report from Stats Canada suggests single women who are over 50 have a higher median net worth than single men in the same age group. And that was not true back in the day. So what has changed? No surprise, women are entering more jobs that pay well, particularly at companies that offer group retirement savings plans. So, given the chance and the income, women apparently will save more. And now on to today's guest. My husband Squatch and I have enjoyed being investment partners and sometimes even business partners together over the years. We've learned that each of us has different skills, and as long as both of us aren't trying to manage the same task at the same time, we can accomplish anything together. We have a deep mutual respect for one another, and that has made all the difference. Squatch has a wealth of experience in real estate investment, in the property insurance industry, and for the past 10 years, he's been an automotive salesman. He's particularly passionate about the future of electric vehicles. And one of the trends he's been noticing lately is financial advisors recommending clients to him. It has nothing to do with me. It's because financial advisors and their savvy clients are understanding more about the financial advantages of leasing a car versus buying a car. So I asked him if he'd explain more about that to you. Come sit around our dining room table and listen in. So for the benefit of our listeners, we're both kind of motorheads. I think our first date was at Saga Speedway Motorway, wasn't it?
I believe it was.
So it's something we've always shared, but leasing and versus buying a car isn't really something that comes as a topic at the dining room table. But we thought we'd cover it today because I know that you know so much about this, and you mentioned that many of your clients' financial advisors are recommending that they talk to you about leasing.
Yeah, I am seeing more of that. After being in the business for 10 years, these last couple of years, I have been getting customers coming in and asking about leasing options as instructed by their financial advisors. So that's good to see. I'm a big believer in leasing, as you know. I believe it's the financially prudent decision for most people, especially people who trade out of their cars every 3 to 5 years. But there's many advantages to leasing over financing or paying cash for that matter.
So how exactly does a lease work? Let's say I have $50,000 saved and I'm thinking about buying a car cash. But if you wanted to show me the difference with me leasing instead, how would that work?
Yeah, so when I see people coming in with big bags of money and wanting to plop all that down on a car, a depreciating asset, it doesn't matter what kind of car it is. But I just kind of cringe inside because I know these people, for the most part, are pulling this money out of some type of an investment that's earning them something. And then to take all that money out and plop it on a vehicle, which is now depreciating daily, it just doesn't seem like the right decision to me, anyhow, in my personal opinion. I instruct people that, the beauty of leasing is that you're only paying for the amount of the vehicle that you're using. And for most people, that is 3 to 5 years. I do get people who come into my office and say, "Oh, this is my forever car. I'm going to have it forever and ever and ever." And they want to finance long term or pay cash. And before you know it, they're in my office 2 years later because they had some type of change in their life. They had another kid. They got a bigger dog. Gas prices went up. They needed something smaller, more fuel efficient. But at the time, people don't realize that looking into the future, life is full of changes, and sometimes that requires a vehicle change.
And so how does the mechanisms of a lease actually work? If I'm buying a car, I know it's pretty easy. I pay for the car I pay the sales tax on the amount of the car, and off I go. But with a lease, it's different, right?
Right. So when you do lease a vehicle, let's use your $50,000 example, for instance. So you're coming to the dealership, you want to buy a new RAV4, for instance. If you lease that vehicle, basically at the time that you acquire the vehicle, a residual value is determined. So let's say that residual value is $20,000 on this $50,000 car.
And so that means that that's what the vehicle be worth in a couple of years, right?
That's right. That's essentially what they call guaranteed future value or residual value. So that is clearly explained on the lease. You know that going into the lease. So in this example, it's the $50,000 car. The residual value at the end of, call it 4 years, is $20,000. Your payment structure's based on that difference of $30,000, as opposed to making a payment on $50,000.
Oh,
So that's why a lease payment is generally cheaper than a finance payment. Now, I need to add too, though, that not all vehicle brands are good at leasing. You generally need a vehicle that has a good resale value, which is usually reflected by good reliability and dependability. So, most imports lease very well because they do have high residual values. And because of that higher residual value, again, closing in the distance between the residual and the price you pay will make that payment less. Another big advantage too, Glory, is of course sales tax. So you're paying 12% if you're avoiding luxury tax. On a lease, you pay no sales tax at the time that you acquire the vehicle. Unlike a finance, when you finance that vehicle, all that sales tax is added right to the top. You're financing all that sales tax in addition to the price of the car. So it works a little differently on a lease. The sales tax is actually applied to the payment. So as opposed to paying the 12% on the entire value of the vehicle, you're only paying your 12% sales tax on your monthly or biweekly payment. Now, that residual value that we talked about earlier, that $20,000, you've paid absolutely no sales tax on that amount of money at all. And the only time you would pay sales tax on that number is if you decided to buy that vehicle at the end of the lease.
so far I've counted a couple of ways we're saving money here. We're saving money because we're not financing the entire value of the vehicle. We're only financing the part that I'm going to be using over the next couple of years. And we're not paying sales tax on the whole amount of the vehicle. We're only paying sales tax on each individual payment, which is way less.
That's correct. I always equate a lease to if it's a 4-year lease, call it your 4-year test drive because, at the end of 4 years, you're ready to move on. Most people are. I mean, I love our new car now, but I know 3 years from now, I'll be tired of it. I'll be ready for something else. The beauty about that is you have that option at the end of your lease period. If you've absolutely madly fallen in love with that vehicle, well, no problem. It's yours to keep. It's the best used car you ever owned since you owned it since it was new. And you go ahead and pay the residual value plus the sales tax, and that car is yours.
Okay. Now, are there any differences in insuring the car?
All that remains entirely the same as if you would say financed a vehicle. If you're insuring that vehicle, you're on the insurance documents as is the in the case of a lease the name of the manufacturer who is leasing the vehicle to you.
Okay. So when someone's buying a vehicle, one of the things we need to consider, then you mentioned, is resale value, right? So
Mhm.
whether you're buying or leasing. And if we get into an accident, let's say I bought that $50,000 car, I bought it rather than leasing it. And that will reduce the value of the car when we go to trade it in for a new car. So what happens if I'd chosen to lease a car and I have an accident and then I go to trade it in? Are there any advantages to leasing in that example?
There certainly are, and this is another reason why I lease my car. So, in the event you're in an accident and it's a substantial accident and they repair the vehicle, let's use your $50,000 car again. You're driving around your little RAV4 and at no fault of your own, someone rear ends you and does $10,000, $15,000 damage to the back of that car. the car is repaired. But now you are showing a declaration on the VIN number of that vehicle.
So is a declaration mean some kind of a ping against it because it just alerts every consumers that this car has been in an accident and the value has been reduced?
That's what's going to show up on the Carfax or the car proof. So when, of course, when everyone buys a used car these days, they're entitled to see a copy of the Carfax or car proof, and that accident will show up. And that accident will indeed diminish the value of the vehicle. So in some cases, it can diminish the value in half, depending on the severity of the damage and repair amount. In a lease, you're completely protected from that. That becomes the burden of the manufacturer, and it's not your burden. If my little car was hit numerous times and I repaired it and had it repaired at a ICBC accredited repair facility, those declarations would show on the title. And when I come in to get out of my car and roll into my next one, they can pull all the car proofs they'd like. But I am basically immune from any repercussions from that. So in a lease, you're carrying the immunity idol, and you are not affected by diminished value. Now, I've seen that work on the opposite side for people who have financed their vehicles long term. And they, throughout the course of them owning the vehicle, they've had a few accidents. They come in to trade that vehicle into something else. Of course, we pull the Carfaxes and the car proofs, and we see the damage history, and that will certainly affect whatever the resale value of that vehicle is, because you have to understand that as a dealership, we also have to share that information to the new owner. So, again, leasing will protect you from that, and that's even a better advantage than had you paid cash for the vehicle, because still, even if you own that vehicle outright, again, accidents and a history of accidents will diminish the value of that vehicle.
Now, from the automotive industry's standpoint, we're seeing electric vehicles as the wave of the future, right? Volkswagen, for example, is expecting 70% of its European sales to be battery-operated cars. And globally, we're expecting about a quarter of all cars to be battery-operated in 5 years. When it comes to EVs, do you recommend leasing or buying?
Yeah, so when it comes to battery electric vehicles, you don't want to make a long-term commitment on one because that technology is advancing so rapidly. The battery electric that you buy today may very well have double the range in a few short years. So my advice is you lease that battery electric vehicle and lease it for 3 or 4 years. And then when you hand in the keys, you upgrade to the next generation battery electric, which could very well have a range of over 500 kilometers, which is, seems to be the target that a lot of the manufacturers are chasing right now.
And that makes sense because I don't have to worry about selling that outdated technology in the car down the road, finding a buyer for a car that nobody else wants because they have this new technology. So instead, I just hand it over to the dealer and I get the brand new one without the hassle, right?
That's right. So it's pretty tough to sell your electric vehicle with a range of 200 kilometers when the new and improved model has 400 kilometers. So it's again, you just don't want to be stuck in that situation because that will certainly, we spoke about diminished value before relating to accidents. You can very well have diminished value as a result of functional obsolescence. So it's certainly something to consider.
Am I going to have a problem then if I do lease with the residual value of my EV in 4 years because of that obsolescence? Will I have a problem turning it in?
Well, no, because the manufacturer has already guaranteed the future value of that vehicle. So, in the example, let's say it's a $50,000 battery electric vehicle, and again, you've leased it for 4 years, and the residual value or guaranteed future value of that vehicle is $20,000 4 years from now. When you bring that vehicle back, if the vehicle is worth less than 20,000, It's the manufacturer who's on the hook for that, not you.
And that's a big difference.
Now, condition's a big factor here. If you drive over your allotted kilometers, and the norm for Vancouver Island on many leases is 20,000 kilometers a year, and you can change that. You can adjust that to be higher or lower, and that will change your payment accordingly because, again, you're either using more of the vehicle or less of the vehicle. So, if you end up bringing that vehicle back with more than your 20,000 kilometers a year and, with cigarette burns on the seats and a cracked windshield and a damaged fender, yeah, you will be dinged for that. You are expected to treat your leased vehicle as if you financed it. But, for most people, they treat their cars well, and they bring their cars back, and all they do is hand over the keys and roll into their next lease. I can tell you with some brands, Toyota specifically, we are dealing with many folks who come back and they actually have equity in their vehicles. So, for instance, we'll use the RAV4 as an example again, where someone leased a RAV4 for 4 years, a $50,000 car. The residual value was $20,000. When it was appraised upon return of the lease, the car appraised at $24,000. They now have $4,000 worth of equity that they can roll into their next vehicle. So that doesn't happen with all manufacturers, but it certainly does happen on some of the manufacturers that have a solid reputation for reliability and resale value.
So that's actually another good point is we've determined what the residual value is when I buy the car. Then 4 years down the road, we do an appraisal to determine what the value is then. And if it turns out that the value, even though it's in good shape, is less than what you said it was going to be 4 years ago, I don't have to worry about coming up with that difference. Is that right?
That's right.
And so I don't have to worry about functional obsolescence or market factors. All I have to worry about is taking care of my car.
That's right.
And I'm not taking that risk. So I think that's really positive. So what would you say to maybe people who have heard bad things about leasing and or for whatever reason they're concerned and don't want to? What would you like to say to the listeners out there about leasing?
Well, if I can stress anything, I would at least tell consumers to at least have an open ear about leasing. Leasing is a great alternative for many people. We didn't even really cover the write-off potential too, with regards to people who do use their vehicles in a business-related fashion. It is truly about just paying for the amount of the vehicle that you're using. It's about leveraging the vehicle, getting into that vehicle for as little money as possible, and remaining in that vehicle for a time that you have predetermined, and then having options at the end. You certainly have the option of buying that vehicle, owning that vehicle at the end of the lease, and you would simply just pay that residual value plus the sales tax and own that car. So, I always look at a 4-year lease as a 4-year test drive. If you don't like that car after 4 years, then hand over the keys and roll into something else. So it truly does give you options. The minute I mention leasing to a lot of people, I can just tell they tune right out. But those who do remain tuned in, the vast majority of them decide to go with the leasing option because they do see the benefits to, again, just owning or paying for the amount of the vehicle that you're using. The one last thing I want to cover too is factory warranties. A lot of people lease because they always want to remain underneath the manufacturer's factory warranty. And in most cases, the factory warranties are 3 year, 60,000 kilometer bumper to bumper and 5 year, 100,000 kilometer powertrain warranties. So if you're leasing within that period of time, you are always under the factory warranty. When the warranty expires, odds are the lease is expiring at the same time. You roll out of it, get into a new car with a new factory warranty. So there's certainly advantages to that. That's one of the main reasons why we chose to lease, because I do like to remain under factory warranty. And I also like to be driving the latest and greatest product, every 4 to 5 years.
You brought up a point that I wanted to mention also because it was another discussion we were having on the previous episode, and that is helping our parents who are aging. Sometimes I think I've heard you say that leasing can be good if you're only really thinking of driving yourself for a few more years in your lifetime. Is that something you run into?
Well, yeah, I do get elderly individuals in front of me who, have basically told me like, look, they say, yeah, I've got 4 or 5 years left of driving before they pull my license, and you know, uh, leasing works exceptionally well for those folks because it does allow them an opportunity to drive a new car, their last car that they're going to drive. And at the time, at the end of that term, they just simply come in and hand over the keys, and they don't have to worry about trade value or trying to sell it privately. It's just a very easy process of just surrendering the vehicle at the end of the lease, and it works for quite a few elderly individuals who, of course, are pensioners, and a lot of these folks do have money in the bank, and they could easily pay cash for a car. But once they realize that, hey, I can just pay for this car for 4 years and not pay for the entire amount of the vehicle, it does make sense to them.
And that was something that you had mentioned that didn't know about, and that was a prepaid lease.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, you can simply prepay a lease. So if you don't want to have a monthly or biweekly payment, you can just prepay that lease amount, and then 3, 4, or 5 years, however you structure that lease, you just bring the vehicle back and start the process all over again if you like.
So if that person who says, "Hey, I've just got a couple more years, but I don't want to have to worry about having a payment, so they can pay a lump of sum of cash that prepays the lease." I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, and rather than again paying for a $50,000 car plus tax and all that stuff, they're paying for a prepaid lease on that vehicle might be $30,000. So they pay the 30,000, and 4 years later they come back and thank you so much. Here's your keys, and off they go.
And then there's also, I'll just quickly mention what you were saying about business owners who might have a fleet even of trucks or small cars, um, and they can write off the expenses of a lease on their in their business, right?
Well, they can, and I have a lot of folks who will lease a vehicle. They'll write it off through their business, and then at the end of the lease, they'll buy that vehicle because the business was basically bearing the brunt of paying the lease payment every month. And then they just buy that vehicle for the residual value and then own it as a personal car.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So the business paid for the majority of the vehicle. And then at the end, the owner buys that vehicle for the residual value and then keeps it as a personal car.
That's great. Anything else that you we think we should mention about leasing versus buying on?
Oh, I just think we pretty much covered everything. I mean, it's certainly, buying a car is all about options. And I want to stress the fact that not all vehicles lease the same. So be wary of that. There are vehicles that don't have such a good reputation that some cars just don't lease well, period, because they don't have a good residual value. So it all depends on the manufacturer that you're looking at. You'll walk into many dealerships and salespeople know nothing about leasing, and they won't even mention it to you. They just want to get the deal. I happen to be a big believer in leasing, which is why I explain it to any one of my customers who's willing to listen. And I can tell you, after I do explain it to them, the vast majority of them decide to go down the leasing road. Just have an open ear, listen to those options. There's a lot of great options available to the car buying public. So certainly you can always pay cash, but boy, there's nothing worse there's nothing I hate to see worse than somebody pulling money out of some type of an investment account that's earning them something and dumping that entire amount on a vehicle.
Amen to that.
Makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up.
And you know how I do not like spending money on depreciating assets.
Right, right. So there's a way around that, and leasing is the alternative.
So, how can people get a hold of you?
Oh, I can always be reached. I can always be reached at David Gray at NanaimoToyota.com. Or I always answer my phone or text 250-755-9983. Or they can always find me at Nanaimo Toyota in Nanaimo, right off Bowen Road.
All right. Bandit and I will be visiting you soon.
All right. We'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
If that gorgeous baritone sounds familiar to you, you're right. Squatch is the voice you hear at the end of every episode of this podcast. In other news, a survey conducted back in March found that Canadians would sooner talk with their friends and family about their politics or religion than talk with them about their investments. 75% of respondents said it was rude to ask other people about finances. The good news is only a quarter felt it was rude to ask what investments someone else likes and whether that person uses a financial advisor. But still, less than half of the respondents said they would even talk with their own parents about investments. Now, believe me, wealthy families who want to set their children up for success are talking about investments. My belief is we are never going to learn anything if we don't talk about these topics. It brings me back to why I started this podcast. You may be uncomfortable talking about these subjects with your family and friends. If that's the case, you and I can have this time together without anyone else judging you. My hope is that you'll gain the knowledge and the confidence to start having these conversations with those close to you. And perhaps you can start to mentor other women around you to understand more about money. And please let them know about this podcast. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, this is Glory Gray, your personal trainer for financial fitness, telling you to take charge of your finances, plan for the future, but most of all, enjoy today. Bye for now. Want more tips on how to make the most of your finances? Check out our blog at womenswealthcanada.com. And while you're there, sign up to get our email updates. You'll get every episode, exclusive bonus content, and free guides straight to your inbox every week. What is the one question you always wanted to know about money but were afraid to ask? Email us at hello@womenswealth.ca with your question, and we may feature your question in a future episode.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment, tax, or legal advice. It is not an offer to sell or buy, or an endorsement, recommendation, or sponsorship of any entity or security cited. Mutual funds offered through Portfolio Strategies Corporation. Other products and services provided through Glory Gray Wealth Solutions.